Welcome to Aon at the Top, where I have the honor of interviewing some of the most distinguished executives, C-suite, and board members about their journeys and paths to success. I'm your host, Nicole Ward, the Senior Vice President of Sales at Aon. In this series, we draw out meaningful insights and candid perspectives on navigating to the top. At Aon, we help you make better business decisions by turning risk into resilience. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Aon at the Top. I'm your host, Nicole Ward, the Senior Vice President of Sales at Aon, and in this series, I have the honor of interviewing some of the most distinguished executives, C-suite, and board members to draw out meaningful insights and candid perspectives on how they navigated their way to the top. And today, we get to welcome CFO and board member Helen Riley.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Absolutely. As COO and CFO at Google's X, the Moonshot Factory, Helen leads a portfolio of moonshots across a variety of industries, including communications, biotech, and healthcare. Helen also leads the operations and administrative teams that smooth the way for breakthrough technologies to become successful businesses, and she leads X's investment strategy and decisions. Helen also serves on the boards of alphabet companies Wing and Intrinsic. Prior to Google X, Helen led finance and business analytics for many of Google's other bets businesses, including DeepMind and Fiverr, and for sales and marketing across Google globally. Before joining Google, Helen was a strategy consultant at BCG in San Francisco and an investment banker at Morgan Stanley in London. Helen holds a BA and MA in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Helen served on the board of Marqeta, a modern card-issuing fintech platform where she chaired the audit committee for 4 years, and currently serves on the board of Eventbrite, a global event tech platform where she currently serves as audit committee chair and also served on the comp committee for several years. Originally from London, Helen now lives with her husband and 2 children in California. A passionate advocate for wildlife conservation, she served for 5 years on the board of WildAid. And in all her free time, she loves scuba diving, adventure traveling, and singing. What an amazing background, Helen. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Well, good. Well, I would love to start with a little bit of your backstory or origin story. Did you ever envision, in your life in the future when you were growing up that you would end up where you are today?
Honestly, I could never have imagined it. As you mentioned, I studied philosophy and politics at university, and I had never even touched a computer at that time. And to go from those beginnings to ending up working in one of the world's most magical innovation hubs at a company like Google was not something I'd ever even envisioned. But really, I graduated from HBS, and somewhat opportunistically, my husband and I decided, let's try California. Let's work in tech. This was during 2000, 2001, just before the crash. And so we came out to San Francisco. Originally, the expectation was we'd stay a year or two. And then I joined Google back in 2003, and it was a rocket ship. And so that was a momentous decision, as you can imagine. And I've since been there for 22 years.
Unbelievable. I remember that rocket ship. I remember Google back in those years because I was in the Bay Area as well. Well, how exciting. And would you say that there were, you called out a few, pivotal moments where you go, let's try California and technology. But were there other things earlier on in your life that were really pivotal to sort of how things evolved for you? Choices that you made that you now look back on and go, wow, that was a decision that was really instrumental in me being where I'm at.
Honestly, the one that I shared is in the choice of joining Google is really the biggest one. I was living in the UK when I was working at Morgan Stanley and hadn't really considered going to graduate school. And so that was a big decision as it came on my radar. And I was thinking, actually, I really miss studying. I really miss being in a learning environment. And so making the choice to go to graduate school in the US was a big shift because I'd never lived outside of my home country. And then the transition to California. But then really, I would say almost every 2 years since I joined Google, I've ended up doing something radically different. And so the pace of change has been so significant throughout my career, even if it has only been in one company, it's grown from a few hundred people when I joined to, I don't know what it is now, probably close to 200,000 people. Wow. And it's gone from just search, and this is even pre the sort of AdWords days of sort of search advertising, through to now, you think about the product diversity that exists and the billions of users that Google has. It's felt like I've been at a different company every couple of years. And so new opportunities have constantly been presenting themselves. And I guess I've just been really proactive at chasing those opportunities. And sort of I joined X maybe, I think it was about 10 years ago. And it was initially in a sort of finance and strategy capacity. And I have subsequently expanded my sort of purview, both on the support infrastructure side, but also having direct oversight of projects, and then expanded into board roles. And so it's just been this never-ending, exciting learning journey.
That's amazing. I love it, the learning journey, right? Because I think so many times when we, especially in the Bay Area, when you stay at a company for too long, you feel like, oh, I've got to move. I've got to expose myself to different structures, thinking, business models, vision, et cetera. And it sounds like Google and X have really moved, and kept you engaged and challenged. How have you, when you think about mentors and people that have really influenced you and kept you thinking, creatively and in an inspired way, are there folks either at Google X that have been that for you, or outside of your company that have been that for you? How have you stayed mentored?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely feel incredibly privileged that I've had so many meaningful mentors in my life, so many of whom have become personal friends as well. And I've really found them within Google for sure, but also, the way I think about mentorship is much more than just through a hierarchical lens. I actually think mentorship can really come from anywhere. So I feel like I've sourced mentorship certainly from my colleagues and leaders within Google, but on the boards that I've served, I've really benefited from mentorship from the chair of the board, lead independent directors, and then even people who've worked for me, candidly, have really spoken, shared their truth with me, honestly, and given feedback and suggestions. And I found mentorship basically in every direction. I mean, even Rose, who's my sort of administrative business partner, she has been extraordinary. Like, she'll pull me aside sometimes and give me feedback, and I really trust her wisdom. When I think about some of the most impactful mentors, and really when I think about the spirit of what has worked for me, both being mentored and as a mentor, it really comes down to, do I have the trust and connection and sort of the psychological safety where we can both speak our real truths and it can be shared and heard in a way that is candid. And at the same time, but it's creating that safe space and having that connection. And at the same time, someone who's really going to push me out of my comfort zone and tell me truths that I don't necessarily want to hear, but I'm very receptive to hearing. And just give those nudges. I may have a gut feel about something, but maybe I'm not always trusting my gut. And so the best mentors are really the ones who have helped me unpack what I already think, but haven't necessarily owned. And if they think that I'm getting comfortable or not pushing, or pushing too hard, just helping me calibrate so that I stay on a good path. So I am enormously grateful to the mentors within Google, and then also on the boards that I've served, who've been extraordinary friends and guides for me.
I think it's such a great call out about mentors. I call it blind spotting, which is we know what we know, and we know what we don't know, but we don't even know what we don't even know, which is right here, right? That blind spotting. And I think mentors are outstanding for that. But it takes an incredible caliber of human to be able to welcome that feedback sometimes. That's really hard to hear. So I commend you for that. And that's obviously why you've been so successful. In terms of looking back, to have gotten to where you have, certainly in your career, be it board roles, C-suite, the impact that you've obviously had, what were the sacrifices that you had to make along the way? Or were there? Or were you even conscious at the time that you were making a sacrifice that's ultimately kind of led you to be where you are?
When I think about this question of sacrifices, it really comes down to being torn in two different directions and making a choice to maybe sacrifice one thing that you want to lean into in order to support the other. I mean, the best example, the most obvious example that comes to mind is really my choice to actually take a bit of a step back professionally when I had my first child. And that was a really difficult call on the one hand, because I am ambitious and hungry and I want to keep doing what I'm doing professionally and continue to learn. And on the other hand, it was really important to me to spend that time with my child. So I took a step back. I took a smaller role and shrunk the size of my team. And that was a sacrifice that I have no regrets about, but I'm eyes wide open that sort of slowed down the pace of sort of progress within my career. And there were moments where it was incredibly painful because I would see people who didn't make that same choice. Everyone makes their own choice and, swiftly moved past me. And it was painful in the moment, but it sort of all nets out in the end. I have no regrets, as I said, about the choice that I made. And I was very clear in my mind after those sort of early childhood years where I switched to being back on sort of an on-ramp path and aggressively pursued my career and found a support network to sort of help with the home responsibilities and have found that the balance. But it definitely felt like a big sacrifice at the time.
But obviously worth it
Yes,
in
no
terms
question.
of where you've evolved to be, right? I mean, you've held, you have a really fascinating dual role, right? To be COO and CFO in one of the world's literally boldest innovation engines, right? I'd love to understand, what your sort of North Star is when you think about the goalposts and values and principle-based thinking. Are there things that guide you? What are those guideposts?
Yeah, I mean, let me start first of all with the mission of where I work, because it actually ties so close to my own mission, particularly given sort of my role. And so like the values that I have. So the mission of Google X is to invent and launch moonshot technologies that can make the world a radically better place. It's really about doing good in the world, impacting people's lives in a way that is incredibly positive. And that is absolutely core to what I aspire to do. And the other part of the mission is making sure that we're actually building profitable, sustainable businesses. And so I also really care about building businesses that can self-sustain over the long run, because that's the only way you can actually serve as the first part of the mission, which is to help people. And so that has very much been a North Star for me in general, that I really want to, and this I think also ties to, it's my North Star, but it's also the legacy that I would want to eventually leave the planet with, is having made a difference to people's lives through products that can help improve their lives, help educational outcomes, help economic outcomes, help health outcomes, whatever it may be, but make people's lives better. And then in terms of sort of values, I definitely have a set of principles that I always follow that just sort of help guide me through how I want to live my life, and also how I make decisions. So, as an example, one of my sort of principles, I would say, is really about approaching every situation or every encounter with curiosity and wonder. Too many people show up every single day leading with judgment, and that is a recalibration of like how I think, is just show up with an open heart and an open mind and see what I can discover, because there's so much we can learn from other people, and I never assume that I have all the information in a situation. Another principle is really, life is one big experiment. So on the one hand, like, don't take yourself too seriously or anything like too seriously. And nothing is ever final. So it's just a mentality that I have. It's like every step on life's journey is an iteration. Every step is an experiment. And some of those experiments are going to work. Some of them are going to fail. And I'm not going to let them knock me back. I'm going to see what can I learn and just keep putting one step in front of the other and continue to grow.
I love that, leaning into the learning and the opportunity. And I love the open heart and open mind, right? Because I think the more we recognize that we don't know it all, and then we have a lot of blind spots. That it just enriches, like you said earlier, that everyone is a teacher for us, right? There's no one that we can't learn from. I forget who said it, but everyone I meet knows something I don't. I love that. I love that quote. It's one of my favorites. So I love all of that. Well, then can you maybe share, I don't know if there was a defining moment, maybe earlier on even in your career that sort of shaped how you lead or how you've gone on to handle maybe high stakes situations?
I guess the thing that comes up for me right now is my early experiences, particularly in sort of banking and consulting, led me to show up professionally in a certain way. And then I subsequently had to unlearn a lot of those ways of being in a professional environment. So from my services years of experience, I would almost characterize them as putting my armor on to show up to the office every day and really projecting strength first and being incredibly task oriented. It was all about, nothing else mattered. It was just about getting the job done. And I think it was a huge wake up call to me when I first started managing people. And this is when I sort of shifted into Google and I was leading a team of people, and I was showing up that same way. And I'm really grateful for the feedback surveys that we get every single year. And I remember being bowled over by how terrible the feedback was. And it's just one example of many wake-up calls that I've had through my career, that if you hold barriers and you only hold up your barriers and focus on the task over the human, you're never going to inspire followership. You're never going to inspire people to really do their best work. You're not going to be able to inspire creative thinking because it just puts people on the defensive and it just doesn't create connection. So it was definitely a learning for me to lead with connection and to really truly lead with helping people be their best, because that's the way to get the best work. It sounds obvious now, but that was part of my learning journey that I've focused on ever since. It's about creating a safe environment for people, creating connection, encouraging camaraderie, obviously getting people focused on the deliverables, but really getting the best out of people because they're excited to work on things. They're excited to be together. They're excited to brainstorm together. And so promoting almost a culture of fun and play and joy. And don't forget, I'm working in an incredibly creative environment where it's all about radical innovation. And so fostering that sort of a community spirit has been absolutely critical to get the best out of people. They have more fun. I have more fun. We love working together and get incredible results as a result of this approach. But that's just one example of my learning journey in leadership.
I thank you for the vulnerability in sharing that. I definitely think that the world of professional services and banking could use a lot more of that creative team connection that you're talking about. As a lifer in the professional services space, I love all that you're saying, but and they could definitely use quite a bit more of that.
By that was certainly not intended as a knock on professional services. No. But for sure, that was my training ground more as an analyst, and then coming through to definitely leadership roles.
I think it's a wonderful. That's part of your growth trajectory, right, and part of the opportunity. I think it's fantastic. How do you balance, that spirit of sort of a radical experimentation that you just referenced, that transformation, that innovation, and all the moonshotting? How do you balance that with this sort of discipline that's required when you think about financial stewardship, and you think about, operations, right? That's a bit of a balancing act. How do you manage that?
So I agree that there is some inherent balancing act in that, but I would almost argue the opposite, which is the only way to successfully pursue radical innovation, especially if you want to do it repeatedly, which is our whole goal is, we call ourselves a moonshot factory. And the choice of the word factory is because we're trying to systematize innovation and repeatedly come up with radical new ideas. And so if that's the goal, then financial rigor and discipline and efficiency is absolutely critical. Because the last thing we want to do is overinflate investment too early and it not work out, and then we don't have the opportunity to sort of invest back. And so we really focus on investing, honestly, tiny amounts of money. So let me actually describe sort of how the process works. So we'll have lots and lots of ideas. I would say, hundreds of ideas at the earliest sort of end of the funnel that we're constantly testing to see whether or not there is, a magical idea that it's worth pursuing. And it's almost the approach is we're trying to break the idea. Does it break the laws of physics? Technically, is it even possible? Can we build a prototype? And then if it doesn't break, and the majority do, then we'll have the chance to invest a little bit more capital. And then we'll do some more sort of rapid testing, some more prototyping, some more engagement with partners to see whether the thing we're building actually works for them. And so we're getting that rapid feedback. And then if it still looks like it has legs and it doesn't break, then we'll continue to invest a little bit more. And so it's almost the process requires a huge focus on financial discipline and sort of efficiency, because as with every step on that learning journey, we're then making a decision to invest more and more. And so it's really important for me that I want to make sure that we have multiple shots on goal. And if I invest too much too quickly, that reduces my opportunity to take as many shots on goal, which then breaks the whole system. So efficiency and financial discipline is actually a critical component of exactly how this factory works.
That's such an excellent explanation. Super helpful. And how do you embed sort of optionality or preserving flexibility into that sort of long-term innovation pipeline, while you're also committing the resources that you just mentioned, right? How does that all balance?
Yeah, it's an interesting question about optionality. And let me give you sort of one example. So I already described how we're trying to take lots of shots on goal. And so over time, we will whittle it down. And then, at the other end of this funnel, we will, graduate and sort of spin out companies that can be sort of successful and self-sustaining. But the whole concept of optionality is like making sure that we have lots and lots of ideas in our pipeline. But often, the majority, I would say, don't actually work out because they are radical, like impossible sounding off the wall ideas. And a lot of them are just not going to work. But sometimes the reason they don't work is because maybe the approach we've taken is not the ideal approach, or maybe there's a different form factor that may be better. And so even of all of those ideas that don't work, we don't just throw them out. We actually will harvest everything that we've learned about what did work and about what didn't work. And we actually have a term for it. We call it moonshot compost. And so we will essentially compost all of those ideas that then form the earth for new and different projects to grow. And I think that's where the optionality is sort of built into it. I'll give you an example. So one of our projects was Project Loon. So this was the stratospheric balloons that would beam internet connectivity from balloon to balloon and back down to the ground. Now, it was the right problem space for us to be focused on because I think everybody cares deeply about connectivity, and like the human condition is just improved significantly when you think about health and education, sort of economics. And it was the right technology because we were able to beam internet from these point-to-point terminals, but the techno-economics didn't work. But rather than throwing it all out, we gave it a second life. And so it then grew in another form. So there's another company called Tara, which has these point-to-point terminals, which basically, think about it as fiber through air. So they can deliver 20 gigabits per second over 20 kilometers. And so you don't have to dig trenches to lay fiber. You can essentially do it through light. But that original technology was seeded from Project Loon that in itself went away, but the tech lives on. And so that's also how we're constantly building optionality. We never throw anything out, and we're constantly learning. I love quoting the sort of the quote from Thomas Edison, who said, "I haven't failed. I found 10,000 ways that won't work."
Right.
And that's very much in the spirit of what we do. There's lots of things that don't work, but buried in what didn't work, there's always ways that will.
Right. I love that. That's such a great example. And when you think about scalability, when you actually have a moonshot that transitions from like sort of experiment lab rat to actually a scalable business, how does that look?
Yeah, so the goal within X is to focus on what we are best at, which is the sort of early stage ideation and having a vision for what the next 5, 10, 15 years might look like. And, an example of that is actually AI. When you think about it, there's massive AI hype cycle right now. I wouldn't just say it's hype. I mean, it's obviously grounded in huge opportunity, but Google Brain was envisioned 15 years ago before the majority of the population were talking about AI, because we were thinking about how can we apply to AI to Google's core infrastructure and products. What we're best at is the ideation, and what we're best at is the rapid prototyping. And what we focus a lot of our energies on is understanding what are huge problems in the world that can be solved with a radical solution, leveraging breakthrough technology. And so we'll also work with partners very early, even at the ideation stage, to really understand, and this is across industries, what are the biggest problems that they're facing and how might we come up with a radical solution to that problem, leveraging some sort of technology breakthrough. And we will then continuously iterate on that idea, and we will prototype. And as long as we're still figuring out how can we actually get a technological solution to the problem, and does it work in the real world? So we will take our prototypes and we will be testing, we have an agriculture project. So we actually had in-field rovers that was sort of looking at strawberry plants and trying to detect information about whether or not, when is the best time to water them, or, spray pesticides, basically, or determine when to harvest. And so, but we can't really do that just in the lab. It's really important to get out, work with partners, and do that sort of in real world, or in this case, in-field testing, to understand whether what we're doing actually works. And so there's a lot of focus on the tech. There's a lot of focus on the business opportunity and the feedback. And then we are looking financially at the techno-economics and figuring out whether if we scale up, unit costs make sense. Can this actually be turned into real business? All of that work is being done while we're within X. But at some point when we're making that transition from prototype to productization, and from revenue to scaling recurring revenue, then we actually spin out the projects. And so this gets to a sort of scaling question. We will then spin out projects. They may go back to Google, as in the sort of Google Brain example that I mentioned, but we also may get third-party investments. So we'll bring in market-based capital and have VCs or strategic investors come and put capital in to drive that next sort of phase of scaling and engagement with partners.
Yeah, that's super helpful. That sort of roadmap, and thank you for speaking to that. And in terms of pivoting a little bit here to sort of risk and resilience, of course we're a risk firm, so I have to ask a few questions on risk. But when you think about resilience and governance overall, it would be interesting to hear about a topic or a time rather when there was a major project that was under your purview that maybe didn't go well, right? That failed. And I know you talk that most of them do fail. Most of them break. You try to break them. I get that. But, was there one that really stands out as much as you can share in terms of what you learned, what the team learned, what the organization learned that helped your team and you evolve, to that next level?
Yeah, let me give you an example of a project that we did decide no longer to pursue, and that we have actually published some of our learnings publicly, so definitely one I can talk about. And it's an interesting one because it's actually in the realm of nuclear fusion. So there was some research that was performed at Los Alamos and I think some other labs in the 80s and 90s, and they had a hypothesis about how to pursue nuclear fusion, but they didn't have the equipment to really test their theories. And so you fast forward to today, and a lot of the technical capabilities to do some of this testing, we're now, decades ahead. And so it was possible. And so the team at X decided that this was something that we would actually like to pursue. And they even partnered with some of the original scientists that had written the papers back in the 80s and 90s. And so I think this is a really interesting one because it gets to your question of like risk. And we always think about what is the reward to risk ratio. In this example, I would argue that there was probably, sub 1% chance of us being successful. It's a really, really hard problem, which so many people over decades have been trying to solve, and it hasn't been solved yet in a way that can be scaled. And yet there is such a desperate need for energy resilience and sort of energy stability around the planet. So when you think about it from a risk-reward standpoint, there's a sub 1% chance of it being successful. But just imagine what the rewards could have been had it worked. And this is exactly the kind of risk-reward to reward ratio that we think we should be working on at X. So we actually were successful in building out a lab, and we did some testing, building essentially a fusion reactor. And we learned a lot in the process about what might work, but we learned a lot about what might not work, and we just couldn't get stable enough results to be able to continue. And so it was shut down eventually. But in my book, even though the project itself didn't work out, I still see it as a successful demonstration of our whole process and our methodology in being this innovation factory, trying really hard things in the knowledge that a lot of them won't work. And I think it was actually really helpful for the community at large just to see that we are taking these kinds of risks and that it's okay to take these kinds of risks. And even for the team to be bonused for having tried something really hard, even if it didn't work out. The other thing I would say is that it may, especially wearing my CFO hat, I couldn't help thinking about, how much is something like this going to cost? And yet what blows my mind is, again, with this ruthless focus on efficiency, we were able to build it with, fewer than 10 people and put a tiny amount of money into it, certainly relative to what my expectations had been when I first heard about the project.
Wow. That's such a great story. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And as a CFO/COO, I know that you interact heavily with boards, with the external shareholders, obviously, regulators, et cetera. How do you ensure that you're transparent, that you're in alignment, and ensure trust, especially when you do have these high risk investments, right? How do you balance all of that?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things that come to mind. The main thing I would say is that we're focused on solving huge problems. And whether it's shareholders, whether it's regulators, whoever the stakeholder may be, there's deep care about solving these problems in the world, and with the aspiration, obviously, of making successful, profitable businesses. And so what we've actually found is what's most critical is expectation setting. Like, we don't have solutions today, and we're not pretending that we have, here's a fully baked solution for you we can easily plug in. It's really about, we are very early stage, but let's solve these problems together. Let's figure out how we could work together, whether it's, partners, regulators, you name it. How do we actually solve the problem in a way that is cost efficient and that can be self-sustaining and is going to do good for the world? And what we found is that there is overwhelming excitement and receptivity to working together. So it's not like we have a solution, we're trying to push a solution on people. It's not like we're taking sort of crazy risks in ways that could be destabilizing. It's really about close collaborations, close partnerships. And you mentioned even with regulators, when we have a vision of what we might want to build, we're already engaging with regulators on the vision not on the finished product. Hey, now we built this thing, we need to get an approval for it, but can we actually influence regulation in order to achieve an outcome which is good for society? And so I think just taking that very transparent, collaborative approach and really being clear on expectation setting has gone a long way.
Yeah. Balancing that sort of structure, checks and balances, but not creating a lot of drag, right?
Yes.
That's the sweet spot there. Tell me, when it comes to sort of, when you're putting on your leadership hat here on this one, what's your approach to building a team, to managing a team that is, able to thrive with a lot of ambiguity, with an accelerated learning environment, and all the pivots that you have to endure?
Yeah, I think a lot of what your question is getting at is, how do we encourage people to take huge risks, and how do we encourage people to face huge uncertainty? And that is actually so much at the heart of what is most important in building a Moonshot Factory, because what we're really looking for is people who have a humble growth mindset, but who are also incredibly curious and incredibly passionate and are willing to face massive ambiguity and uncertainty and be okay with multiple failures in the spirit of learning. And so there's a bunch of, but this isn't something that you can just tell people, hey, don't worry about it, take the risks, you're good. It's really important that we are demonstrating and sharing signals top down and continuously about the fact that this is the kind of culture we're trying to build, and it's a safe space to take those risks. So I'll give you sort of a couple of examples. One is when we are encouraging teams to set goals, we really want them to be super ambitious and try really hard things. But if you have a rewards system that only rewards hitting your goals, what are people going to do? They're going to lower their ambitions. But if you can actually encourage people to try those hard, really, really impossible sounding things,
Moonshots.
hard goals, moonshots. But what you reward is, okay, did you try? And were you efficient in how you tried? Did you take multiple shots in your trying? Did you learn a lot along the journey? And have you shared those learnings back with the organization? So it sort of raises the bar in our collective understanding on the space. If that is true, then you've succeeded and should be rewarded as such, even if you haven't hit the specific goal that you've set for yourself. The other thing I would say is, when you're working on radical innovation, you don't even know if the goal that we're jointly setting is the right one. So the learning journey is more important than the goal itself, because you may go 20% along the path of the learning journey and realize that the goal was wrong and you want to pivot. But if you have too structured and rigid a system that forces people, nope, continue on that path because all that matters is hitting that goal, then you're going to have a lot of waste in the system, and you're going to have much longer learning cycles. And what we really want to do is have those the tightest possible learning loops. So that's one example of like how we'll incentivize teams. Another one is, so when we have people set those extraordinary goals for themselves, we call them audacious challenges. We actually encourage everybody to share them in front of the whole company. And so teams will share, like, here's the big scary goal that I'm working towards. Here are the milestones that I'm shooting for. And there's a low probability of success, but here's what we're trying to learn. And creating that community spirit around, oh my God, they're trying this really difficult thing, that can inspire everybody in the organization to also set their aspirations higher and raise their ambitions and raise the bar. And then everybody comes back, at the end of the quarter and shares, did they achieve their milestones or not? But the focus is never, oh, I missed the milestone. Yes, okay, they may have missed, but here's what we learned on the journey. Here's how we're actually applying those learnings into a redirect or a doubling down, whatever it may be. Or, hey, we need to go back to a partner and spend some more time understanding, because our original hypothesis, we have either a greater understanding or a lesser understanding of whether or not we can achieve it. And so those are just a couple of examples of like how we're trying to create this sort of moonshot thinking culture within the organization.
I mean, hiring must just be insane for you. I mean, because you're wanting highly technical, on one hand, and on the other, you're asking for real, personal growth, EQ, self-awareness on the other, which sometimes, don't often go together. I mean, that's a really interesting hire, I can imagine that is not without its challenges.
For sure. And it plays out in hiring, and it also plays out in sort of performance management. And so, when I think about hiring and when I think about the behaviors that we're really trying to incentivize, I often find that the technical skills, because the caliber is just so high, the technical skills can often be a given. Like there's a baseline of expectation around technical skills, and whether that's machine learning expertise or whether it's legal expertise, there's a baseline of technical skills, but what actually matters more is the how. So in our performance management system, in hiring and a performance management system, we'll look at sort of what is the what of what people are doing. So what are the tangible, hard things that they delivered? But our performance management system is much more focused on the habits and the behaviors that people are showing up with. To what extent are they leaning into collaboration? To what extent are they, trying really difficult things? To what extent are they moving with velocity? To what extent are they engaging, getting feedback from within the organization, but feedback from partners? How quickly can they synthesize that feedback? How receptive are they to feedback? So there's a lot of how behaviors that we really focus on through the interview process and particularly through performance management as well, because that's how we're ultimately going to be able to take those multiple shots on goal and end up with successful businesses at the other end of the funnel.
Yeah, no, and I can imagine you're sort of, translating between these sort of, I don't want to say dreamers, but the sort of scientists, technologists, and then the executors on the other hand, the finance operations, team. And, it's two different worlds, right? But it sounds like you figured out a way to balance that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the bar is held high across the board and the expectations are the same, irrespective of whether you're in tech or whether you're in a finance function. These sort of how behaviors are absolutely critical. And so, we really care deeply about creative thinking. So, a lot of what we focus on is, as opposed to, no surprises here, saying no, it's, think about the core tenet of improv, yes and.
Yes
and. And so, we even do improv training with a team just to get in that yes and mindset. And that applies to my sort of centralized teams. When you think about finance and legal and HR and others, they still have that yes and mentality every bit as much as the technologists who are coming up with the radical ideas. And the reality is there's actually convergence between the two because, we talked about we need to work with regulators, we may need to work with partners and deal with what their requirements are. And so we're solutioning together. And a lot of what we are working on may not exist in the world today in the current form or the form that we're sort of pursuing a solution. And so we're breaking new ground continuously, not just in tech, but also, in policy and in sales and like all of these different areas. And some of our moonshots, by the way, even can apply in the world of legal or in the world of finance or in the world of HR. So it's really important that everybody has this sort of moonshot thinking mindset.
Yeah. When you think about 10 years from now and you're looking back, what do you hope that the signature or most important impact at X will be?
Let me start by saying that a lot of the things that we work on have a longer time horizon than that. So even 10 years can sometimes feel pretty short. But let me give you some examples of projects that we're working on that will hopefully continue to grow and expand and have impact in the world. I think the one that most people are most familiar with is Waymo. And I joined X 10 years ago, and so I did have a chance to work on Waymo in the early days. So that is one example of something that I managed to have my fingerprints on. Obviously, it's gone on to live its own life for the last 10 years. But just reducing, the whole premise of Waymo was to reduce traffic deaths. I think there's about 1 million people that are killed on roads every year. And the vast majority, like over 90% of those, are as a result of human error. And Waymo cars, like the data already shows that they're somewhere between 5 times and 10 times safer than a human driver. So that is an example of like a real impact that I'm excited that we will have had at X. Another example I'd give is Wing. This is our drone delivery service. Again, I worked on Wing in the early days, and I now serve on their board. And during Hurricane Helene, there were a lot of roads were inaccessible, and yet there were people that desperately needed pharmaceuticals or baby formula, whatever it may be, and Wing drones were able to deliver to those people in need. And even in London, the Wing team was running a test where they were actually delivering blood samples from hospital to hospital in the city of London. So I just feel like the opportunities are endless. We have other projects. One is focused on the national on sort of electric grids. Think about it. It's one of the oldest and largest machines in the world, and a lot of the infrastructure is over 100 years old. But if you can actually take AI and apply it by creating tools that enable grid operators to sort of visualize and operate and plan for the future, then you can actually have much more resilience in the system. So that's another thing that I'm excited about. So I'm just giving these as examples of, like, we're constantly spitting out companies, and it is a long bake time for them to really have their rapid scaling moment. But we're seeing it with Waymo, we're seeing it with Wing. I hope to see it with Tapestry, which is this grid project, and there are plenty more projects like this in the hopper. So when I think about impact and legacy of all of the things that we've worked on, I'm really excited. But it takes time, and we are talking about 10 to 15 year time horizons to really scale.
Sure. And I wonder, if we think about like sort of the pace of technological change right now, if you think about everything going on societally, geopolitical shifts, all the things, what's the biggest blind spot for Moonshot and X? What do you think is the blind spot for you all?
I guess a lot of the things that you're talking about geopolitical, like that's in the here and now. But I'm sure we have plenty of blind spots, but I guess I would just slightly shift the premise of the question, which is a lot of what we're working on. We're trying to imagine a future that can become a reality in 10 years or 15 years. So I talked about the self-driving cars. I think Google X started working on them 15 years ago. And so it has been a long journey to get to the point where now I think they're doing like 250,000 paid rides per week, which is pretty extraordinary, and that's only growing.
Absolutely.
So yes, there can be near-term shocks in the system. I mean, there's no question that geopolitical instability is prevalent across the board. I guess the biggest risk is when there is uncertainty. There can always be a pullback investment on longer term, further out things. But I'm actually really proud of the fact that Google's really excited about what we're doing and continues to invest in Google X. But I don't feel like there are. I'm sure we have plenty of blind spots, but since we work across so many different industries and we're taking so many shots on goal, there may be blind spots that occur, but we're never thrown by one because there are so many other ways that we can pursue a problem, or so many other industries that we can focus on, or so many new technologies that we're constantly working on inventing that can provide an alternative solution.
Fair. And what advice might you give to sort of emerging leaders, maybe even if you had any specifics for women who are aspiring to kind of follow your path, right? Whether it means, aspiring to the C-suite or the boardroom, et cetera, balancing visionary thinking with all of the, the ability to manage, the day-to-day responsibly. What advice would you give? emerging leaders?
I think I would share advice that I received, which I found incredibly valuable, which is to follow your compass, not your clock. I think we can be in a huge hurry in our careers and have expectations, but pressure on ourselves to achieve a certain thing by a certain date, or, to be in a certain place in our careers. And I definitely felt like I was in that race a little bit. And I'm really grateful the advice that someone said to me, which is to slow down and really think, what does your compass tell you? And I think the way I interpreted that when I heard it was, first of all, centering what is it that I really want right now, and making sure that I am staying true to my values and never compromising. And it was particularly helpful when I was looking to join my first board. And the first, I'd say 2 or 3 opportunities that came to me, I was compromising, but I was in a hurry. And I'm really grateful for the advice that I got of, this is a long-term commitment. Be really, really sure and make sure that you're clear about what you really want. And so that may encourage me to sort of focus back and really think about what I care most about, whether it's mission and values of the company, focus on radical innovation, growth, people that I'd be working with, and making sure that the opportunity I was going for was really truly the best fit for me. And I'm really glad that I did that. And so that is advice that I was given that was really valuable. And so I put it out there for anybody else, just following your compass and being true to your compass, and don't pay as much attention to a ticking clock.
I love that. Pay attention to the compass, not the clock. I love that. Any other insights that you might share? What did I not ask you that I should have asked you? I'm sure 1,000 things, but any other sort of pearls of wisdom or advice or insights you want to share?
The only other thing I would say, I think I've referenced it before, but we all take ourselves and the world incredibly seriously, and the importance of integrating joy and play and fun and a little bit of silliness can go a long way to create a fun environment and enable people to create connection. And you just, so many creative ideas can actually come through play, and we often forget who we used to be as kids and how creative we were. And so how do we integrate that into our lives today? How do we integrate adventure and continue to be ridiculously curious about anything and everything? So that's something that I am constantly reminding myself of. And
we all need that reminder.
We all need that reminder.
Yes.
Especially when things are very hard. You talked about geopolitics.
Yeah.
There can be a lot of things that can be weighing people down, but how do we get to a place of genuine wonder?
Love it.
Which we all had as a kid.
Definitely. And last question would just be, what is something you're really excited about right now? It can be anything, personal or professional.
All right. Well, we're here in LA, and I guess I'm super excited that my daughter just started. She's studying astronautical engineering at USC.
Amazing.
So I am super excited for her new journey as an adult living her world in a new city and new opportunities, and I'll be going to visit her today. So that's what I'm particularly excited about.
That is very exciting. All right, I love it. Now, if people want to follow you, follow what Moonshot Labs X, all the things are doing, where can they go? What should they be?
So X, the Moonshot Factory, we have a website. There's tons of information there if people are interested. We have a podcast. So there's the Moonshot podcast, which I encourage people to listen to learn more. It's fascinating backstories on a lot of the things that we've worked on. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn, Helen Riley. So look forward to hearing from people.
Well, I can't thank you enough. So exciting to get an insight into all that you have going on. It's super interesting. And I just appreciate you making the time to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.